Hello and welcome to Season 8, Episode 7 of the Data Governance Podcast. And this week, I'm really looking forward to my conversation with Or Zabludowski, who is going to talk all things unstructured data. And I've just been dying to get an unstructured data expert to ask about how is it that we can do data governance over unstructured data. So let's dive in and hear what Or has to say on the matter. I'm really keen to have a chat with you all because you've got a lot of experience with unstructured data, which is not something that I've had an awful lot to do with. So it's always great to meet a fellow data geek and talk data. So welcome to the podcast, Or.
Oh, nice to meet you, and thanks for hosting me. I'm super excited to be here.
It's great to have you here. So one question I like to ask all my guests on my podcast is, how long have you been working in data, but also, how did you actually get into it? Because I always think that's an interesting story of how people chose to become data geeks.
Cool. So I'm in the data space since early 2015. I didn't think that I'll end up in the data space when I started my career. In my background, I worked for the Israeli government, for almost 11 years. I studied physics and computer science and got to the cyber defense space. So I worked in cyber defense projects for 2 years. And then 2015 came. Big data started to sound cool. Machine learning seemed to be working at scale. And my unit commander told me that he thinks that cyber defense is a problem with a lot of data and many subtle signals that you need to find in the data. And he asked me to join to build the data-driven defense units for our government. So that's what I did for almost 7 years. So data chose me, potentially. I led data science, data engineering, and data analytics teams, 45 people overall. And I was in charge of the entire operation, from taking data from the rawest, dirtiest kinds of data sources all the way to operational intelligence and giving the thumbs up that everything is okay. Exciting years. I can't talk a lot about it, as you can imagine, but I can say that doing deep learning in 2016, 2017, and getting that to production were exciting times. And my next step in my career was leading the data team for our national COVID HQ during the pandemic. So that's the short version, I guess.
You must have had a lot of data to do with COVID as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So it was September 2020, I think, where the second wave of COVID has hit the world. And people thought that humanity is at the danger of extinction. And I got the data team, 24 data analysts. We were responsible for strategic decision support and operational intelligence. So that's everything from deciding what's the lockdown criteria for the country, all the way to prioritizing vaccines and test kits. So that's a pretty wide range of that.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, I have an interesting story about that. I got the task for defining the lockdown criteria. And technically, that ended up in an Excel sheet where we had to rank the cities according to the risk of COVID infections and write the numbers of the size of population right next to them. And I realized that the criteria that we were technically recommending on was locking down 4.5 million people in their houses. And that's a pretty big decision to support. I didn't make it, but then I realized what's the real impact of data in the space.
Yeah, that certainly brings it home and makes it real. It's not just numbers. It's actually going to have a real life impact. Wow, that's a great story to bring that to life. So, obviously after COVID, you decided to set up your own company. And I think it sounds really interesting because you kind of say that you're bringing structure to unstructured data. So I want to kind of ask you, what made you want to do that in the first place? Why did you do it?
So at the beginning, we thought it was a bad idea, and I'll soon tell you why. But I think that the first point in time when I noticed unstructured data, and I mean all kinds of textual data and videos and the images was during my time in the COVID HQ. We had all these research reports, like when the epidemiologists interrogated people, asking them about where they got infected. And we had tens of thousands of reports with information about what makes people get infected with COVID. And everyone wanted to tap into that and understand what's behind this pandemic and how to prevent it. The problem was that there were no tools around to do that. So we just read through a bunch of them, did some keyword search, and couldn't reach any conclusion. And the information was clearly there, but we didn't have the time or the resources or the capabilities to do that. And uh, later in the journey, during the phase of trying to figure out what this company is going to be like, my co-founder and I thought that we were going to start a company to support the US healthcare system and drive operational efficiency in operating rooms. That was like the next stage, transitioning from COVID to operating rooms. And we realized that all the valuable information in an OR is actually doctor's notes and surgery reports and patient information, all in text. And then we realized that there is some kind of repeating pattern in that. So the next stop was talking with data teams that actually do this for a living. And we asked them what they're doing with their unstructured data. That was 2022, mid-2022, before ChatGPT came out. And almost all the data teams, we talked with 70, over 50 of them just told us that they don't have any unstructured data. And we were surprised because I don't know a company that does not have PDFs and emails.
Exactly. So they just didn't
Yeah,
even understand what unstructured data was.
yeah. I mean, I really want to work for a company that doesn't have email, but I can't. I technically can't do that. Uh, and we realized that there is a blind spot. I mean, this information clearly exists, and it's clearly what drives business, right? Human communications, calls and transcripts, chats, emails, feedback data, all these kind of things. But data teams just did not realize that this is data. And then I think that the last part was when we held an interview with the former CEO of Snowflake, Bob Muglia, where he said that he thinks that the biggest transformation in the modern data stack is going to be unstructured data. So that was 2022. And then we realized that we were onto something. And the point was that data teams are used to work with structured tabular data. And we asked,
Mhm.
what if we structure the unstructured so they can work with it? Um, so there was a business need, there was a technology gap, there was an opportunity that was also realized from the outside. And then we decided to double down. And that was before ChatGPT came out. And for the first 6 months, nobody thought that this is a good idea to work on. So Flexor had a fun first year, I'd say.
It must do. So, and you must experience the same as me that these days everybody wants to get their hands on more data. And a lot of people are now calling this data democratization. So I'm just thinking about it from being a data governance geek and making sure that people understand the data that they have and everything. Is what kind of challenges do you see that arise from giving people access to unstructured data in this pursuit of data democratization?
So that's an interesting question. I think that's the most painful part is that it's really hard to give them access, even if you want to. So most of the organizations these days don't even have the opportunity to face the challenges after giving access, because the modern data stack was just not built for unstructured data, but all the use of large language models and generative AI is all based on textual data, right? You tune the models with text. You use text as the knowledge base behind the models for RAG applications. So that's the first part. But when you do, and when you give them access, surprisingly, the first problem is strategy. At least this is how I see it. Just figuring out where you want to be in next year, in 3 years, in 5 years, and what you want to achieve. There's clearly an opportunity. Large language models are making waves, and you should use your unstructured data somehow. But the question is, what for? Which use cases? And I think that as a founder in the space, one of my life missions is to educate the world what you can do and what you should do with your unstructured data. And truth is, it's not everything. There are many things where you should rely on your structured, well-defined data if you can. So the strategy piece is like, just imagine a blank canvas. There's text, you have all your business problems, text is connected to business problems. How do I get from text to business impact? And there are limitless opportunities, and there is no guidance. I think that time will make its magic. And
Mm.
this is the part of it. And yeah, there are a bunch more. Like connecting structured and unstructured is another challenge. Like, how do you put the pieces of the puzzle together? Because
Yeah.
not all of the information exists in unstructured data, right? If you analyze your customer base, some information may appear on the calls, but a lot of it is locked inside your CRM. And you don't want to extract it from text if you have hard facts, valid facts that your sales reps feed. So
Yeah.
the magic in it, connecting it together. But how do we do that when unstructured data is not normalized, not organized in any way? It's just a bunch of text in a single column in a data warehouse. So that's the second part. Even if you bring it to a warehouse, it's basically just text.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I think you were making me think, and you made me smile though, because I was with a client yesterday and we were talking about a data strategy, and we were talking about exactly the same as you, is that we've got to actually go, what are the business problems? What's the business objectives? What are the problems? And how do we need our data to be to solve those problems or deliver those objectives? And I think that was so good when you said that, because I know from just talking to so many people these days that everybody gets so excited about, these large language models and what they can do. And we also know that people typically get excited if they get access to more data. And I'm just thinking that, as you were saying, you could let people loose on all this unstructured data on top of what they've already got. And as you say, they might make a mess of it. But I love that bringing structure to even thinking about what you're going to use it for, so you get it right in the first place. I think that's really,
Yeah.
really important. And that's probably the data governance geek in me speaking.
Yeah, absolutely. By the way, one interesting challenge that we see, first of all, first time you show data analysts or data engineers unstructured data in a structured form, they don't know what to do with it because they're not used to the freedom and the amount of like the size of the opportunity. And just think about like reading an email thread. I can ask you, um, what was this thread about? And there are many ways to answer this question. You can talk about the sentiment, you can talk about the personas involved, or the topics, or the action items. So unstructured data is a single column that has a lot of meaning in it. And in order to structure it, you have to be really clear about what you're trying to achieve. And in order to do that, you need to ask the right questions. And asking the right questions is hard. Um,
It is, but
so,
that almost feels uh, it feels a bit like data governance is like understanding, whereas I would normally say we've got to understand what this data is before we use it, which is kind of what you're saying as well. But with unstructured data, you're never going to understand all of it. But I like your understanding what question are we trying to answer, so we pull out the right information. But
yeah.
you can probably guess what the next question is I'm going to ask you, which is, now, obviously, from my personal point of view, I don't want people in my clients just accessing and using data unless it's got some degree of data governance over it, so we understand it. So I kind of ask you, what do you do when it comes to data governance? Do you implement data governance over unstructured data as you kind of add structure to it? Or is
Uh,
there a different way of doing it?
Oh, okay. So first of all, the answer is yes, and second, the answer is complex. And the problem with unstructured data is that there is no predefined schema, and it's flexible.
Yeah.
So even if you have two sources of support tickets or product reviews or whatever it is, they are not necessarily standardized the same way. The text is not even organized the same way, and so in order to govern it, you have to define these, let's say, like rules or maybe like definitions of what each field means, but you don't have them standardized. So you have to figure that out first. But the second part is that when you give access to an unlimited corpus of text, you might find out that it contains things that you didn't intend it to do. And we had a really interesting story with one client that they had a massive S3 bucket with all the company's emails. And they wanted to use it to train their support chatbot because they have tons of support emails. And they realized that when they loaded this data, it also contains tons of HR related emails, internal emails. And that's dangerous because it looks like a single data set from a single source, but truth is that it was the aggregation of the entire
Wow.
company or the business. So we are working on, I'll call it a philosophy for governing unstructured data that we call contextual governance. Just like the structuring part is related to the questions you ask, the way you want to govern it is dependent on the context. Because a data point might be considered sensitive from if you
Yes.
ask one kind of questions and completely insensitive if you like
Yeah.
not sensitive, not interesting for other kinds of questions. If you try to extract medical conditions out of emails, that's sensitive. If you just want to identify if the customer was happy or if they thought that the service that they got is awesome. So that's another thing that's not sensitive. Same piece of information,
Mm.
different kinds. And we're trying to combine that with the all the access-based how's it called? Like the models that let you control access for table
Yes.
columns. So we can integrate into more standard governance frameworks, I'd say. So there's understanding what's in your data set, structuring it efficiently, understanding what's in your structured data, and then governing as if it was standard structured data.
Excellent.
That makes sense.
So yeah, so actually it's almost like by definition you're forcing data governance as part of the process of structuring the unstructured data.
Yeah, people consider that a major risk. If we don't do that, they'll say, don't touch this data. I have no idea what's inside. Please
Yeah.
don't do that. And it's also like there's of course, there's cybersecurity, but I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about risk. I'm talking about trust in the data. You want to make sure that if I say that something represents 20% of your data set, it's 20% out of a data set that actually represents what you think it represents. So it's not only like the sensitive data thing. And people
Yes.
also
Well, I am sure you've seen the same, but over the years I've seen a lot of things go wrong and people say, oh, well, the data was poor quality or something. And it wasn't that it was poor quality, it just wasn't what they thought it was. So it was almost like the wrong data. So
yeah. And I think that the coolest example in the space of unstructured data is transcriptions. When you transcribe a call, I'm sure that you try to transcribe a call or read a
mhm.
summary, and sometimes because of accent or pronunciation, things don't translate well. Sometimes you use unique terminology that does not translate because the model is not aware of that. And then you took amazing audio as the source, you transcribe it, and then you have messy data. And this is a data quality issue that's sources data processing, and it creates many interesting downstream effects on analysis.
Yes, I think that's an excellent example because when I first started using those kind of transit transcription apps, it couldn't do governance. So every time I said data governance, it typed up data government. And I'm going, I didn't say that. So I'd end up having a call or something like this, and the person would think I was mad because I was over pronouncing governance to make sure they could see it wasn't a T at the end. But yeah, so you're right, and that's how mistakes happen because people it's been transcribed. We think that's gospel truth, and it's not necessarily. So I'm afraid we have run out of time, but I'm sure we could have talked for hours longer. You're such a fascinating person to talk to, or we might have to have you come back at some point in the future and answer some more questions
I'd
about
love to.
unstructured data. It sounds very exciting to me. So thank you so much for being a guest on the podcast.
Thanks for having me. It was a pleasure.
I hope you found that as interesting as I did, and some really useful pointers there on the fact that we can do data governance over unstructured data. And if we are converting unstructured data to structured, we absolutely must do data governance. So obviously, I think Or's a great chap because I really enjoyed the conversation, and he's making the case for more data governance. So that makes him a great guy in my books. So I hope you can come along next week. I am doing another interview. Now, this time I'm interviewing Dennis Kessler, who is a very experienced data governance guru. He's been working in the field for a long time now. I think we've been connected and liking and commenting on each other's posts on LinkedIn for ages. And we actually met in real life when we were on a panel a couple of months ago. And we just really enjoyed talking to him. And he's got so many useful things to say. And following on from the recent episode with Jeanette Gonzala on AI, Dennis talks a little bit about data governance and AI as well. So I hope you will come and join me next week.